visiting faculty from other universities and colleges, the representatives of the pharma and students, my warm welcome to all of you to this event. A big thank you to Deakin for allowing us to partner with them. I know for your 25th year celebration, you had a wide choice of institutions with whom you could have collaborated, and yet you chose us to partner with you for the special symposium on diabetes research. And a big thank you to you for the confidence that you have in us. Diabetes today, you'll hear more about this in the sessions which follow, but for those of you who are here only, India is in the second place as far as diabetes is concerned in the world, and China is ahead of us. But the projections from the WHO and the IDF are that in the next 10 years or so, India will certainly emerge as the leading country in the world with diabetes. And the reason for this is pretty obvious, because we will become susceptibility to diabetes, about which we'll speak about in a few minutes. It's no surprise that diabetes is a major challenge in this country. And therefore, the need for research, because we have to think globally, but we have to act locally, because we have to find culture-specific solutions to our own problems here. For example, the things that we learn from Deakin University are fantastic. We learn their techniques, we learn from their experience, and there's a lot that we can learn from Australia. It's a big country with a small population, as somebody said yesterday at the dinner, and we are a small country with a huge population. I think many Indias will fit into Australia if you put it geographically, and yet we are only the population of Australia is so small. So when you are able to handle health so well, and if you are able to set the standard so high, it gives us hope that we can learn a lot from you. And in things that you can find in India, which you may not be able to find in Australia, for example, the connection between poverty and diabetes, the epidemiological transition which is occurring in our country, and the newer things of Kalpana's. We're going to talk about new aspects of diabetes we never thought about. We only thought fat people get diabetes. It's no longer true. We know that the environment produces diabetes. So this symposium hopefully will throw a lot of light. And the idea behind inviting students from different universities to participate, and I know that Delhi is here, the Delhi Institute of Nanotechnology, is to foster more and more relationships, to see that we build on whatever they've already done, and to see that more and more students are benefited. We are very proud that for the last 5 years we've had an extensive collaboration with Deakin University. We collaborate with almost 15 or 20 universities abroad, but with no hesitation, and not because this is a Deakin event. I can tell you with all pride that Deakin is the best university with which we have ever collaborated. We started with PhD, then we went on to a diabetes nurse educators program, and we're hoping to expand this both in terms of number of students, more PhD programs, and also more courses. So I wish this symposium all success, and I hope that at the end of it we will have much more light on the problems that we are facing today, and hopefully many more solutions that we can all work together. Thank you.
Think about the terrible things that have happened in New Zealand today, and we grieve for families who have lost loved ones. We grieve for Jacinta during the Prime Minister of New Zealand and what she must now do to come and to support the people of Christchurch who have had earthquakes and now face this terrible incident of terrorism. Many people have died. The next generation matters to us, my friends, and how we educate them. He notices that people no longer dig. You always have a machine. People no longer sweep their floors. They have a vacuum cleaner. People no longer have to heat their food. They use an automatic stirrer. And so none of us use the muscles that we were given as part of our evolution. So I leave you with those thoughts, and I hope that the partnership that we have between our two parties is going to produce outcomes and results that you might find useful. But my friends, I'm here for another purpose, and I'm just going to get on to because I want to read something to you. We are, just recently we offered Dr. Mohan an honorary doctorate from Deakin University, and he was kind enough to accept. and it was a grand occasion. But the Faculty of Health, the partnership is with our Faculty of Health and with our Institute of Health Translation, and they have now made Dr. Mohan an honorary professor. And I just want to read to you the felicitation in that regard. Dr. Mohan and the Madras Diabetes Research Foundation has been the longest-serving partner of the Faculty of Health in India. And Dr. Mohan has been a delight to work with and an inspiration to all of our staff and students. As a researcher, he is exemplary, having published well over 1,000 papers in the peer-reviewed literature and mentoring hundreds of staff and students. As an educator, he has been responsible for the dissemination of knowledge on diabetes internationally over several decades. And Deakin University is proud to have developed jointly with Dr. Mohan a diabetes educator course that is being delivered by the MDRF to community nurses at very low cost. In 2018, Dr. Mohan was awarded the Harold Rifkin Distinguished International Service in the Cause of Diabetes Award by the American Diabetes Association, making him the first doctor from India to receive this award. We at Deakin now honour Dr. Mohan and our long and proud association with him, and so it is our great pleasure to announce the appointment of Dr. Mohan as an honorary professor at Deakin University. Welcome and congratulations, Professor Mohan. And we look forward to the wonderful leadership and mentorship that you will give to the next generation in how to lead a good life, how to be an excellent researcher, and how to be a thoroughly splendid partner and friend. And I have a small gift to mark the moment.
Of Deakin University, Professor J.N.D. Kalanda, respected Deputy Vice Chancellor, Professor Julie Mohan, and my dear Dr. Mohan, an international authority on diabetes research as well as diabetes practice in the entire country. As it is very evident, we keep seeing him receiving honors and accolades. Every time I meet with him or do not know him, he is already an honorary professor in, to my knowledge, about 6 foreign universities, and he has already received nearly 7 honorary BSc doctorates from different universities, in addition to a hardcore research BSc degree that he has got from our own university in Tamilnadu. So my hearty congratulations to Dr. Mohan and to Deakin University for having effectively been conducting this collaboration. As a person who has been involved in developing collaborations, I know how difficult it is to sustain collaboration. You can start collaboration, but sustaining collaboration is extremely difficult. 25 years of collaboration is not a simple thing. Marvelous achievement. My hearty felicitations for all those who are responsible for the successful collaborations. This gets doubly significant because of the fact Deakin University collaboration is primarily in the area of diabetes research, which is very much needed for our country. As it has been already highlighted by Dr. Mohan, we are trying to catch up China in disease burden related to diabetes. So that is the need for our own country to really strengthen diabetes research, in which Dr. Mohan has made phenomenal contributions for this country, and his group has made a lot of contributions. As a researcher myself, I always feel that Indian research should make a breakthrough to be quoted by international scientists. So if that too is to be happened, this is the appropriate time. When already Dr. Mohan's publications are being quoted in so many places, in various aspects of research, may it be epidemiological research or genetic basis research or operational research, and so on and so forth. I also like to see our Indian researchers to look at some original research which can give or alleviate the sufferings of the diabetic people. How can we do that? I thought I'd just cite one instance. Just only about a week ago, I read one article in the journal Cell Metabolism. This article is titled as Preserving Insulin Secretion in Diabetes by Inhibiting VDAC1 Overexpression and Surface Translocation in Beta Cells. I am not going into the details except to tell you that these researchers have demonstrated that these VDAC1 antibodies, VDAC is nothing but the voltage-dependent anion channel 1 protein present on the mitochondrial outer cell membrane of the beta cells. So these cells, if they are made by some way of hyperglycemia, they overexpress and they damage the cells by way of its severity of diabetes may increase. But if you can have some antibodies to VDAC1 or inhibitors to be developed, then that may alleviate the suffering and it may try to help in preventing the progress of the disease per se, including the complications. So these researchers have shown metformin is working like that in addition to its routine modes of activity. One more mode of activity of their activity by inhibiting the VDAC1 protein has been shown. They have also demonstrated using some animal models, DBDB mice models, to show that this kind of inhibition can be there. What I am trying to suggest is we have a lot of wealth of information in not only our modern systems of medicine but also in traditional systems of medicine. A lot of claims are being made, but unfortunately they are unsubstantiated. Why not we develop models besides the disease models, some assay models, and then try to demonstrate their real reliability and reproducibility? I think that would be another way of translational research that we can embark upon. I wish this workshop every success. I thank Dr. Mohan for having given me this opportunity. Thank you very much.
First speaker of the session. We're really lucky to have Professor Anjana here with us today. She'll be talking on the burden of diabetes in Australia. So the structure of the session is each speaker will... the structure of the session is more Professor Anjana.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Thank you very much to Deakin for this opportunity and in one little dot corner of the country and say this is the prevalence of diabetes in India. Ladies and gentlemen, thus was born the ICMR India Diabetes Study, or INDIAB study for short. It's funded by the Indian Council of Medical Research and the Department of Health Research Government of India. We've been doing this for the last 10 years, which is possibly not very good for a prevalence study, but unfortunately that's how government funding works. And we've been doing it in phases, so we've done this, so the different phases have been completed, and when done, we're still doing it right now, we should have about 124,000 people, that's 1,24,000 people in the study, making it one of the largest studies on diabetes ever done. Currently, I have data from about 80,000 people from 15 states of the country. So if you look at the diabetes data, this was the first one that came out in 2011 from 4 states, but we then have data from 15 states that came out quite recently, the Lancet Diabetes Endocrine, and this is what I was trying to tell you before. So if you study the study in, let's say, Bihar, you'll say that the prevalence of diabetes was 4%, whereas if you did it in Chandigarh, you'll say it's 14%. So the epidemiologists in the group probably know that the truth is somewhere in between. You have so much of heterogeneity in everything, including diabetes prevalence. If you look at the diabetes prevalence based on GDP, the higher GDP states have higher prevalence. So this has been the story that we have been telling over so many decades of people, richer states, richer populations, and this has been true thus far. However, what we showed in this paper is quite interesting. So if you look at this is the rural areas on top and this is urban areas shown in the panel below, and pink bars are lower SES, whereas the blue bars are higher SES, socioeconomic status, socioeconomic status, right? So you see all the blue bars are higher than the pink. However, in urban areas of certain rich states, the richest states in the country, the opposite has started happening, which means that the richer people have less diabetes, and this has now spread to the poorer sections of society. And this is indeed true of the developing world. You know, anywhere, US, Europe, Australia, you're possibly going to tell me that diabetes is more prevalent in the poorer sections of society. And you can see in India as well, this has started happening. So this is what we call an epidemiological transition, wherein this kind of change, we are mimicking the West. So you look at many parts of Chennai or any other metropolitan city, you were in Delhi yesterday, you walk into some of the malls, you could very well be in Australia, couldn't you? So we start mimicking the West in our dietary patterns, our physical activity patterns, and yes, our diabetes patterns as well. So we have both. We have the Indian story as well, and we have the new Western story also that's developing. The other thing that's really unique to India, if you look at absolute burden numbered across urban and rural areas in terms of absolute number of people with diabetes. You'll also see the male and female shown here. The blue is the male and the pink is the female. But the point I'm trying to make about in this slide is that if I were to do this study in Australia, we've done it in many other countries, we have collaborators in Denmark, the US, we find that diabetes only starts at like what, 45, 50 years of age? But look at India, the starting point of diabetes in the age group of 25 to 34 years. So we have a shift to the left by at least 2 decades as compared to any Caucasian population. So this is a huge worry because we do know that diabetes goes undiagnosed. After it's diagnosed, it's oftentimes uncontrolled. 10 years or so from diagnosis, complications start setting in, and 10 years about-ish from then you start having end-stage renal disease. So imagine somebody who's diagnosed at 25 or 30, by the time they're 50, they're possibly on dialysis, meaning a transplant, having a heart attack. So this is an active, young adult population at risk of disease and morbidity. What about the ratio of self-reported to newly diagnosed? Don't worry about the numbers. Suffice to say that for every individual who is diagnosed in this country, there's at least one person who's not diagnosed. So that tells you how much more this disease is going to spread and how much more of a problem this is going to be in India. What about glycemic control? Does everybody who has diabetes have an A1C of less than 7? Well, of course not. Okay, so this shows you the number of people with an A1C of less than 7, and that's green. And you can see, irrespective of whether you're in an urban area, whether you're in a rural area, only about 30%, a third of our diabetics. That is commonly done. There are huge issues regarding cost and things in India. Only about 15% of the urban population and less than 10% of the rural population can afford and do an SMBG, or self-monitoring, regularly. As you would expect anywhere else, this is mostly type 2 diabetes, so there's a huge proportion on tablets and a very small slice in green taking insulin. So people are very resistant to insulin use, and the red indicates insulin plus OHA. But there's another nice story that we'd like to talk about, and that's about migration. So when you look at people migrating in, large numbers from rural areas into urban cities, looking for jobs, looking for opportunities, what happens to their diabetes, migration? And shown here are various diseases, diabetes, pre-diabetes, obesity, etc. You'll see these orange bars are quite high, sometimes even higher than simply living in an urban area for a long time. So this whole phenomenon of rural to urban migration, the increase that happens in your socioeconomic status personally, the surroundings that you come to influence you in a bad way in terms of metabolic diseases. So this is sometimes for a long period of time. These are the odds ratios of various diseases. So 2.2 for diabetes, for moving to an urban area, and for obesity it's also quite high, 2 hypertension and dyslipidemia. A simple question, have you heard of a condition called diabetes across the country? Less than about half of the population, general population, seems to know. So there's like a half of people who've never even heard of diabetes, leave alone of whether it can be prevented or there's something that they can do about it. What about can diabetes be prevented among those who had heard? Well, again, about a half of them did know. Of course, these are significantly higher in urban areas, possibly due to better education. So I'd like to conclude by saying that the ICMR INDAD studies shows that the burden of diabetes is increasing in India. The prevalence varies widely. There is an epidemiological transition and there is a westernization, a globalization that has begun to happen in India. There's a shift of the epidemic from urban to rural areas and from older to young people. There are large numbers of undiagnosed diabetes in the country. Only a third of those with diabetes have their A1Cs under control. A very small percentage is doing SMBG and insulin use is really low. Migration into urban areas increases your risk for diabetes and other metabolic diseases, and knowledge about diabetes is still low in the population. So suffice to say that we have a lot of work to do. Can we do something about it?
There are some islands of success, and I'd like to share a couple of them with you. But before that, why is diabetes so common in India? This is a question which we are often asked. Is it genes? Is it environment? Is it both? Quick answer, we don't know all the answers, but we do have some solutions. We're finding new answers all the time. There's something called as the Asian Indian phenotype, which has been described for quite some time now. We call it also the South Asian phenotype. It's also common to Pakistan and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka and so on. And this consists of several factors. Some of them are listed here. The list is not complete. The first thing is, as Anjana just showed, we seem to get the disease, and we have some evidence for that, although in this 10 minutes I can't give you all the evidence. And therefore I'm going to give you just 2 success stories. Both of them are community-based, okay? And both of them are not randomized clinical trials. The randomized clinical trial which we have published is called DCLIP, which was published in Diabetes Care 2 years ago. You can read that up. In the interest of time, I'm not showing you that. But this is something which we can all do in our societies, and that's why I'm presenting this to you. We started our epidemiological studies in a very humble way by selecting a slum in Chennai, which is a low-income group, and the typical flats where the middle-income group in Chennai live. This is in the late 1990s, 1998 or so, when we started what's called as the CUP study. It's a very simple hypothesis here. Who do you think will have more diabetes, here or there? Anjana already gave you the answer that today it's different. The lower income group is getting there. But our hypothesis then was that these guys would have more diabetes because they're using cars, they're better off, their body mass index is higher, and so on. And therefore, no surprise, although it was published in a good journal, because there's no data on intra-urban prevalence of diabetes. And we showed 12% in the middle income group and 6% in the low income group. This is a surprise. We didn't expect 6% in the poorest of the poor in Chennai at that time. Your diabetes is going to go up much more. So can we do something about it? Is to increase your exercise. And they said, no, in Chennai you can't do that. Because you start exercise, you start walking in Chennai, you will die of many reasons. Number one, a dog might bite you and you may get rabies. Second, a truck may hit you because there's no traffic rules followed at all. The third, the smoke from the truck may hit you, which is what probably Kalpana is going to talk about. So they said, no, we can't do that. So we said, you have to find safe places to walk. That's simple. So they said, where do you find safe places to walk? So as we're talking, we found that this is a colony, an enclosed gated community, and just next door to that was a large vacant space. So we said, what is this for? They said, well, we're going to build another colony there, another residential colony, the Asian colony too. So we said, why don't you change your plans and build a park instead? So this is WHO success story, and this is the video, which is not working. As well. Okay. So that's the colony, and just next to that is this built by the residents themselves, using their own money. This is a turning point, and the second park and the third park was built by different residents of Chennai. And then the government took over, and they realized, oh my gosh, now these guys are doing it. So they built 100 parks, and they renovated 100 parks. So we got 200 parks in Chennai as a result of this. Now you can see, people have started walking. So they have a safe place. So we said, let's extend this experiment. It's not a randomized clinical trial, but still it's a community empowerment. Let's see what happens to the exercise. So there were skeptics who said that they will not increase their exercise. But they were wrong, because from 13% of people who exercised, it went up to 52% of the colony exercising. You may say, why didn't the other 40% do it? Well, many of them are old, some of them just can't walk. But this is good enough. This is 277% increase in exercises within a colony by the park that they built. Incidentally, the park is still active, 10-15 years have passed, and it's maintained very well. Then we said, okay, now what happens to diabetes now? By that time, diabetes was increasing in Chennai. Most of these are Chennai-based studies, and you can see from 2%, it's now over 24% of people about 20 years of age having diabetes in Chennai. For exercising. So we went back. Remember, the original figure was 12%. We have only 15%. We had a tough time getting this published because this wasn't a randomized clinical trial, but we had other evidences. Their exercise was more, their waist circumference was less, and so on. But a slight increase in the diabetes. Now comes the bad news. The bad news is, you know, the other colony, we completely forgot about them. Because they had other problems. They had tuberculosis, they had malaria, they had all kinds of other infectious diseases, they had alcoholism, they had all kinds of problems. They're not ready for diabetes prevention. So we left them alone. 10 years later, we went back and said, let's just test them and see what happened. Then we got the shock of our life, because from 6%, it increased to 15%. And as Anjana just showed you, now it's actually higher in the lower income group. It will be totally unethical to leave them out now, but we had no data at that time. So the bad news is that it's increasing in the poor people. But this is an example of prevention of diabetes through community empowerment. We didn't do anything else. We didn't give them drugs. We didn't give them anything. They built the park and they prevented diabetes. Now if this can be scaled up in every city, we can prevent diabetes, even without the government, without anybody, just by people themselves being aware of it. The second and the last story I want to share with you is a rural story. Now, 72% of our population, of our doctors, practice in urban areas. So this is a complete mismatch. No government from the British days onwards till today has been able to persuade our doctors to en masse move into rural areas and practice there. It's a tough call. There's a lot of challenges in rural areas. There's poverty, lack of awareness, lack of access, and lots of other problems. So we said we must crack this problem. That we didn't find any such solution anywhere in the world. So we said we have to evolve one. And since doctors can't go, we have to use technology. And the first principle that we said was, we'll make the 6A test, which we'll implement. That's, we'll make diabetes care available, accessible, affordable, appropriate, acceptable, and accountable in rural India through a project which we took up in Chunampet. Chunampet is in Kanchipuram district. For those who don't know where that is, that's Chennai, and that's the next district called Kanchipuram district. At the southern tip of Kanchipuram district is this little village called Chunampet. There's another adjoining one called Ilidu, and we worked in both these places. Why did we go there? Because the Zamindar, the owner of the village, he was a bachelor, he owned the whole village. And so he was giving away land. He gave away land to the government, to schools, to electricity board, to the National Agro Foundation. And one day he called me and he said, I'm going to give you 10 acres of land. And you tell me what you're going to do with it. So I said, okay, we are also interested in a rural model. If you're giving this free of cost, we will do everything free of cost there. We will build a rural center there. And then using telemedicine, we'll go around the villages spreading diabetes awareness, and also that we built. We had to build it from scratch. And inside is verily a mobile diabetes hospital. So it has ultrasound in it, it has echo, it has ECG in it, Dopplers, it has retinal photography, it has blood testing units and everything inside, air conditioned. It also has a satellite which was donated by the Indian Space Research Organization. So based on this, we started going to villages and meeting people such as this, where we go to the huts, we employ young men and women of those villages, train them to do whatever a doctor would normally do, heights, weights, blood pressures, blood sugars, and so on. They do it really well, because for them it's a big opportunity in life to serve their own community. If somebody turns out, so we screen the whole population, and if somebody has diabetes, the van is just parked outside their door, they can go inside there and have a complete checkup for diabetes as they would do in Australia.